Gustavo Razzetti, welcome back to Partnering Leadership. I am thrilled to have you back with me.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me again.
Really enjoyed our last conversation, Gustavo. Believe it or not, it was almost 4 years ago, episode 196 on your book, Remote, Not Distance. So I want to actually start with that, Gustavo. There was a period of time where we talked a lot about the transition to more remote work and environments. Then after that, the pendulum sort of swung a little bit, with some companies demanding people to come back. Would love to know what you have seen and in what ways your ideas with respect to what it takes to operate in a somewhat hybrid or remote environment have evolved over the past few years.
I think that one of the most important things that has not changed is that leaders tend to react to things rather than lead and anticipate. I know many of your audience here are leaders and might not like this as a getting started, but what happens? So when the pandemic hit, companies had to adapt because they have any other choice, right? And then people started working from home. First, it was a little bit of an improvisation. Then they learned how to do it. And then they started loving how to doing it, right? Now that after that, things started to go back to the new normal, many companies thought, hey, it's time to get back to work as we used to. Why? Because many people like to control. They confuse seeing people, they confuse presentism with actually productivity. I think one of the biggest mistakes is that we are still, and I wrote that about that in the book, we're still putting the schedule over the work. I don't care where my team are working. I care that they do great work. And the conversation about whether we work in the office, remotely or hybrid, still being dominated about visibility versus what's best for each company, for each team, for the work.
Couldn't agree with you more, Gustavo, on a couple of elements. One is that in many of the organizations, when I actually challenge the thinking, there aren't clear outcomes that individuals are supposed to produce. So, for whatever reason, people feel happy when their employees are showing up to the office. Now, they could be surfing the web, they could be daydreaming, they could be doing whatever. They feel happy about that. That said, though, I wonder if there are benefits now with a lot of AI. We will get into some elements of that later as well. There are benefits that aren't captured in achieving the outcomes in a remote environment.
Totally. For me, it's not one or the other, it's the right combination of both. When we talk about hybrid, is when do we need to work together and when do we need to work at our own pace? You're talking about AI. People are using AI more and more, and AI is actually getting in the way of collaboration because people are trusting AI, whatever it's Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, more than their actual team members. So what's happening is a lot of people go to the office to have calls like this over the Zoom with people that are maybe in the next floor in the same building, or they're spending their time working more with ChatGPT, Claude AI, than with their coworkers. Yes, we're in the same place, but we're not really co-creating. We're just dividing and conquer the workload and then doing it on our own in the same place.
It is a really hard transition. Now, I wonder what told you that there is a conversational debt in organizations and in teams, and that particularly needs to be addressed.
Great point. So first, what do we mean by conversational depth? For those watching the show, that's the cost that we pay for the conversations we avoid or the ones that we don't manage the right way. And at first, many of those feels like, hey, maybe I overspend in my credit card, a couple of dollars here and there, nothing's going to happen. But when that becomes a habit or a pattern, in the long run, your debt starts to compound. Exactly, it's the same thing that happens with teams, and it manifests in three areas. conversations about alignment. So where are we heading, what we want to achieve together? Conversations about belonging. How do we collaborate? The kind of culture we want to build, if we feel included, if we feel safe to speak up. And then conversations about how we work. We work remotely, we work in person, how we distribute tasks, how we make decisions, how we run our meetings, right? And my point about that is I started observing that firsthand. Basically, the things that people don't know, they don't know. I work is mostly with executive teams, but also work a lot with their middle management and then direct reports. And I started seeing that how leaders see their organization and how people actually experience it, there are huge gaps. People agree on in the room, they feel that they're on the same page, but then they go to their corner and complain about the decision. They express their opinions there. They execute in different directions. That gap is really expensive. It becomes more and more expensive. And when people realize it, they're almost bankrupt.
Now, you framed this slightly differently, Gustavo, than the traditional ways we've approached it. I do think psychological safety is important, and feeling comfortable sharing ideas and engaging with others in conversations is important. But you go beyond that, where the conversational debt is not just because people don't feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, that's correct. And I've been working with psychological safety for over 8 years. So I had to challenge my own thinking, right, through my own research. That's important. And one of the things I realized in the study I perform and also in my work with different clients, there are three groups of people. There are people that, because of their personality, they speak up regardless of the environment. It's a safe environment, it's not safe, it's halfway, they still gonna speak up their minds because who they are. Then there are people that are more environment driven or sensitive, that depending on the signals they get from their leaders, their colleagues, the context, they might be more or less open to share. And there's a third group, I call them natural avoiders, that they never speak up. No matter how safe the context is, people are going to withhold their opinions because they don't care, they don't want to participate, they don't want to take risk, or they just go with the flow and let others make the call.
And Gustavo, I want to underline a point that you made, because in many instances, I see when I'm interacting with executives and leaders, they say two things. They say, first of all, I tell my people, be open, share your thoughts. And then they use examples of an individual or two that fit within the first category you were talking about, of people who are willing to engage and are willing to challenge their thoughts. What I hear from you is that those people would do it regardless. Therefore, we need to be in tune with the others. How can we as leaders do that, though?
The first thing is reframing what's the problem that we're trying to solve. When we are not getting people to speak their minds, share feedback, participate, or even pushback, because leaders need people not just to tell them what's working, but also what's not. So when I ask people, what do you think other people don't speak up? Everyone said a vast majority, 73.5%, people don't speak up because they're afraid. When I say, what about yourself? Fear went from 70 to 30%. The number one reason why they, no others, don't participate is because they think that things won't change. I call this the pointless paradox. People, either because they, at one point, they were sharing stuff and nothing happened, or maybe because they saw in other organizations, because we carried that baggage, that leaders didn't take any action or whatever, people stop caring, people stop sharing their ideas, thinking, why should I speak up? Why should I share my idea? Why should I challenge or ask any questions if nothing will change?
That's an important point. That I love that pointlessness paradox, where people, whether based on their experience within this team and organization or the legacy that they bring from other teams and organizations, say, it's not going to make a difference anyway. So why would I share? So, what do you as a leader need to do differently to break through that?
Perfect. First of all, don't ask if you're not willing to listen, or even worse, you're not willing to change stuff. I've worked at and with many organizations that they do these performance reviews, employee engagement surveys, whatever. And when the results are great, what happens? They publish it everywhere, town hall, celebration. When the engagement surveys go down, what happens? They don't even share the results. They hide them. People are waiting for something to happen and they keep rescheduling the meeting. So the signal is, if you're not willing to share bad news, if you're not willing to be honest, don't even ask, right? That's the first thing. Second is, beware what you ask for. If you're willing to ask for feedback, it's because you should be open to listen to every voice, not just the ones that match what you think. One of the things that I observe in many organizations, that when we talk about people not speaking up, even in a safe environment, we usually talk about toxic companies as synonym of very aggressive, very unsafe environments, places where you're going to get consequences, repercussions because of speaking up. But there's a different side of toxicity, which is companies that are very nice, or I call them too nice cultures, that people put harmony over performance, harmony over friction, over tension. So people are never going to speak up because they don't want to be seen as not a team player. I want to be seen as a team player, as a friendly, as a member of the team. So I better silence my opinion and not create. And then things explode outside of the room.
How do you break through that, Gustavo? In a lot of organizations, no one wants to be the disagreeable. People don't want to cause extra friction. We have been told and trained about the importance of relationships, which are important, but then sometimes that is at the cost of the performance you're talking about. So, how do you then tackle that?
The first step is to make that debt visible. If you're gambling, you're in or whatever, no, you're not going to convince people, hey, gambling is not good. First, you need to make them realize they're actually the actual cost, not just the money, but relationship, trust, their own self-confidence, right? So the same happens in teams. We need to make the team aware of the cost of those avoided conversations. Yes, it looks great. We get along. We like each other. But then the quality of the ideas suffer. The trust actually suffers because everyone's playing the same game. And when I'm lying to you, you're lying to me, we are lying to each other because we want to get along, people start to sense those signals. And at the end, this explodes. So it's an accident waiting to happen. So we need to realize when, early on. I have a quiz that I developed to help organizations start measuring and unpacking that depth, whether it's alignment, belonging, or collaboration. But I also have a couple of exercises and tools that I use with teams to start, because in the end, it's not the consultant. It should be themselves that they should have tools to start realizing, hey, what are we missing here? I also have a set of very easy questions for people to start reframing what we're not surfacing, not to intentionally make it a habit, that don't assume that because no one is challenging the thinking, that everyone agrees with the thinking.
So, you have great frameworks, exercises, tools, questions in the book, Gustavo. One of the challenges I'm sure you also see is that in many instances, the executives' schedules, their meeting schedules, everything is overflowing. So it's hard to even take the time to have a conversation about conversations. How do you prioritize doing that and recognize the significant difference it can make when the CEOs and executives are saying, sounds great. Maybe next year at our retreat or planning meeting, we'll spend 20 minutes on this because we have a full agenda.
The first thing is that being busy doesn't mean that we're smartly managing our time or being productive. I always say that sports teams and artists like rock bands, they spend more time practicing than actually playing. In the business world, if you're practicing, let's call it reflecting, learning, whatever, that's feels like a waste of time. But then we play and we suck because we're out of shape, we are not fit, we are not coordinated, we have too many players, so maybe we lack players, so everyone's playing the same position, out of sync, right? And the time that we waste in meetings that end with another meeting and end with another meeting, if we stop the ball and we say, hey guys, what game are we playing? What are we trying to achieve? Who play offense? Who plays defense? And we shuffle how we play the game, I would tell you we would save a lot of time moving forward. We don't want to invest time now and we keep wasting time over and over.
It's a beautiful analogy, and I love the way you framed it, Gustavo. And one of the important things about it is I see a lot of organizations addressing the symptoms rather than the root causes. And here is what I mean by that. In that I have seen some where they've declared meeting bankruptcy, or they have said we need to reduce meetings and have drastically reduced meetings. That can be helpful, but those are addressing the symptoms rather than taking the time to address the root causes that are leading to the need for those meetings. So I love that because you're saying address the root causes, and the lack of these conversations and this conversational debt is a critical root cause.
Totally. Building on that comment about meetings, I said that meetings are like mushrooms. If you don't change the conditions, they're going to continue to pop up. And there are many companies that eliminated all the meetings and the recurring meetings and whatever. And then they started rescheduling them around the system. The thing is, we need meetings. Meetings are not the culprit because when we want to work together, we need to have conversations, discussions. The problem is we have so many bad meetings that then we don't make time for the ones that really make sense. So we need to be more intentional. It's like remote work, as you asked before. Rather than having a one-size-fits-all approach to remote work or meetings, we need to understand which meetings are a waste of time and which conversations we really need to protect. So we don't need to get together to report information. We can read that. We can have our AIs report for us. But when it comes to making decisions or when it comes to brainstorming, getting together, that might make sense.
It absolutely does. Now, the title of your book is Forward Talk, the bold new method for getting teams unstuck, Gustavo. And you talk about backward talk versus forward talk. What's the difference between the two?
I know it sounds really like on brand, but the point is, where are we focusing? Are the conversations that we're having helping us move forward, so become a better team, make better decisions, innovate, create better products? Or are we having conversations that get us stuck in the past, right? When we blame each other, we get stuck into what happened 5 days ago, 20 years ago, whatever, with a bad hire, whatever the example is, or we get stuck because we are avoiding the problem. So instead of addressing the root cause, we keep discussing symptoms, and symptoms are going to come to resurface over and over. So the difference between one and the other is backward talk works like an objection. When people say, we tried that and it didn't work, or we don't have budget, or we need to wait for Mahan, the CEO, to make the decision. He's not here in the meeting. Forward talk is about reframing those conversations. Okay, what can we do with the authority we have right now? What are the conditions that change or have to change so we can make that idea work? So we focus into the future but we open possibilities instead of getting stuck in what didn't work on an obstacle that happened in the past.
Opening up those possibilities also relies on something else you talk about, which is that conversational agency. How do you define conversational agency, and how can we have more of that in our conversations?
The point is, usually when things don't work, we blame someone else, right? Someone that was there before, someone that wasn't there, someone that came too late to the conversation, instead of seeing what's our part. One of the building on this idea of the pointlessness paradox, people are usually waiting for someone else to speak up. If they still care, no, because there's a process, we stop speaking, we stop caring, then we quit or get fired. But when you still care, but in this moment in which you stop talking, you wait for someone to go first. And my point is, if everyone waits for someone else to go first, no one does anything, right? So someone needs to go first. That's owning the conversation. That's having the courage and the responsibility to basically, if you're part of the problem, be also part of the solution. So we screw up a project. This is about having ownership in the sense of, or how did I help that happen? And what can I do differently moving forward? If I model that, whether I'm a leader or a team member, I'm inviting other people to also do the same, to also say, hey, I also was part of that issue. This is my part. This is what I can do differently moving forward. So everyone start thinking that the problem and the solution belongs to the sum of all those perspectives, not to just one person or a different department.
That agency is critical if we're actually going to make progress as a result of these conversations. Now, maybe it's the word conversation, Gustavo. Maybe it's how we have approached it. There are a lot of times where I hear executives say, we don't need more conversations, we need faster decisions, we need action. When do you move from conversations to decisions and actions?
You don't need to spend like a day having a conversation, right? But for sure, if you don't have the right conversations, then things are not going to work. And then you're going to have to have a conversation about the conversations that didn't happen. For example, the principle of disagree and commit, it allows a conversation in which leaders are on purpose inviting people to show their disagreement. What's wrong about this potential decision, this path? What is it that you like? How it's going to hurt you or your team? But then there's a moment in where we say, okay, we hear you, we curate, maybe I'm going to tweak the decision based on your feedback, but your feedback is going to be ignored. And then everyone says, okay, we had the conversation, now we commit. And that works really well. On the contrary, when you avoid the conversation and say, hey guys, this is the direction you have to follow, people are going to say, yes, sir, for sure. But then when they go back to their computers or phones or whatever, they're going to be pissed off, they're not going to be happy, and then they're going to boycott or move in different directions. So then you're going to have another meeting with the team to see what's happening, where we misaligned.
You address one of the problems that I often see and hear about, Gustavo, is that sometimes the executives or leaders don't ask the questions because they say, I won't necessarily be able to do everything people say. It's not that you have to do exactly what is voiced in those conversations. You acknowledge it, you talk about it. Through that process, you reach a commitment that brings people along and makes them more engaged and more committed to the process than not asking in the first place and just giving them the decision.
Brilliant. Next time I should have brought you as a co-author because you know what I'm talking about. Exactly. This is when I was talking about the people stop speaking up because nothing happens. People are not stupid. Yes, some people might think, oh, they never change things, but people want to be considered. They want to be listened and they want to get a response. It's okay. I listen to you. I'm not taking your advice because of this, and this is what we're going to do. Of course, you cannot do this. I'm not suggesting that leaders do this with the whole organization. Even some companies do. But if you have direct reports, The guys are there because they are smart, because they have expertise, and most important, views and perspectives that you lack. So you have to pay attention to what they have. But then it's your call. If you dismiss something, at least tell them, look, I'm not going to take your advice for whatever reason. You don't need to over-explain, but at least people felt they were considered. And that changes everything.
It really does. And I think in a faster changing world where we need to be able to tap into the collective wisdom of a team, whether leadership team or team at any other level, this becomes even more important. Now, you work with a lot of organizations yourself as well, Gustavo. You observe, you survey. I'm wondering, what do you see as signals of high conversational debt?
Great. I'm going to give you some basic hints, right? Certain decisions require speed. Others require time to reflect before you invest half your budget, right? So when teams move into agreement too quickly, that's a sign of an issue. When meetings end with another meeting, that's another sign of you're having conversational debt. When people look at each other, you ask a question, people start looking at each other instead of whoever, or even looking at the leader for permission to speak up, that's another sign of that.
I love that, Gustavo, because one of the things that I do with some clients is I get an opportunity to sit in on some leadership team meetings, just observing people's body language. And as you said, looking at each other or looking at the CEO indicates a lot about the conversations that aren't being had. Therefore, that conversational debt that exists. From your perspective, what might be a question a leader can ask where they can start bringing people along to recognize the importance of conversations and the potential for conversational debt in their team?
Top of mind, for example, leaders tend to assume that people are aligned. And one question I use over and over, it is, what are we not aligned on? So this question works because of two reasons. One, it's making okay to say, hey, there's something that we're not aligned, so let's share it. And second, it says, what are we not aligned? It doesn't say, why are we not aligned? So it assumes that we might agree on certain things, but not on others. So it really starts the conversation. The other one is, with or what perspective are we not listening to? So that invites, are we not listening to the challenger? Are we not listening to the subject matter expert? Are we not listening to a department? So inviting to that. The other thing is, what would our competitors laugh about if they hear that we're about to make this decision? So this invited to, we all do that. We figure what, oh, look at what this company is doing, what that company is doing, right? And we laugh. Well, role reversal and say, and that's a great way in a funny, because in the end, conversation doesn't need to be always serious, to invite people to be more challenging and more open about what's happening in the role.
I love those questions because they not only give permission, they encourage responses from people. Now, one of the things that, Gustavo, we touched on very lightly earlier, and I've used with many teams, is to use AI or AI agents to record conversations where the AI can reflect on who is spending too much time talking, who is not talking, what the tonality is. I want to get your thoughts and perspectives on in what ways can AI be helpful in reducing this conversational debt? And in what ways do you believe AI can get in the way and increase the conversational debt?
Most of the framework I created, it's based on team conversations. So group conversations, not necessarily one-on-one. So some of the principles apply, but this is not just leader talking to a one member, it's the team with the leader, without the leader, talking as a group, right? So one of the things that often happen is AI is used for one-on-one conversations. And it's okay that we use it to prepare, because maybe I want to have a chat with a colleague that we're having some maybe hard time, and I need to use AI, or I can use AI to, how do I frame this in a way that the other person's not going to feel defensive? That could be a great way. A bad way is when people use AI to get information because they don't want to talk to other people or to each other. No, so same way, yes, no, way to do it, way to know. The other thing is there's a lot of research that has recently been published about people are trusting AI more than their team members. And this is a great issue because not every information that comes from AI is trustworthy, but most importantly, it feels that if my tech expert or my finance expert or legal expert says something, I immediately going to question it, not because I want to learn more, I have a different view, but because I trust AI more by default. And that's a kind of a problem, right? So one of the things I work with team is we need to adopt AI as a team, no, as a team member, not as a assistant for each of the team members. It could help, and it helps in that way, right? I'm not saying we shouldn't use it, but we need to embrace AI as a team member. I was reading an article about now we need to onboard AI agents, right? As part of, and that needs to happen collectively, not just as my AI, because if not, we are splitting that collaboration and one's focusing on how can I be more productive versus how can the team become better and be more productive as well.
It is looking at it as a team member and one that can augment. One of the challenges I've seen is a level of deferring to it almost as an oracle and
Mhm.
therefore cognitive offloading as opposed to another team member. Because if there is another team member and the team member says something, you would be more skeptical, challenge the thinking, at least in your own mind, even if you aren't comfortable to do it in the group. While when it is something that comes out of AI, there is a deference to it, which by itself can impact the team dynamics and the conversations that people have with each other.
Totally. And I think that it's important to define what's the persona that we want that AI agent to play within the team. What are we missing? We know that AI tends to be very amicable and very positive and whatever in the answers they give. And they treat us, even if we push, I ask AI and I use many tools and I train them. And even I keep telling them, challenge me, they still are nice. You know what I mean? So that's not what we need. So what's the personality of that AI agent that's going to fit your team to make sure? So if your team is suffering from being too nice, groupthink, then your AI should be more challenging. If your team is suffering from lack of conversations, very aggressive environment, maybe you need an AI that's more like an ambassador that brings everyone together, finds common ground, no? So I think that's a great way to think about how to bring technology with a purpose.
I love that thinking, Gustavo, and I wrote a post about it a couple of months back. I had a funny experience where every time, and this was with GPT, I told it to challenge my thinking. It told me how brilliant I was to want it to challenge my thinking. So it just kept going in a circle, telling me how great I was. And I felt really good afterwards. But part of what you're saying is the persona that we give to these AI agents will make a big difference in those team interactions and the collaboration. Now, I wonder, Gustavo, when things are sinking, where you see a lot of this forward talk, a lack of conversational depth, what do you see? What is the environment like? What are the conversations like? What are the meetings are like? When do we know, wow, this is all clicking?
Yeah. First of all, it's not perfect, right? Second, it happens most of the days, but not all of the days. And people realize that. So when it's like you start a diet and one day you say, oh, I went off diet. You don't you don't feel like a regretful and then feel bad and then go back to your habits. Say, I just had a bad day. So that's the great teams are not perfect. They can take a bad day and then go back to the pattern. One thing is, as I mentioned, they focus on forward movement in terms of what can we achieve. And when someone falls into backward patterns, because we all do, the other members acknowledge that, and they have the agency and the courage and the generosity to call you out in a good way. Say, hey, Gustavo, look, I hear you, but look, this is not what we agree. We need to get back to. So the team self regulates. That's one of the critical conditions. This is not a framework for leaders. It's not a framework for team members, a framework for the team. Of course, there are different interventions that you can have as a formal leader, but also for team members. But the idea is that everyone has to play their part.
That's what gives it a lot more power. It is not owned by whoever is the highest on the org chart within that team. It has to be shared ownership among the team for them to recognize the importance of these conversations, potentially the conversational debt that exists, how to overcome it, how to address it, and how to hold each other accountable. It's not up to one person to hold others accountable. Then would love to know your thoughts, Gustavo. What conversation do you believe many are most likely avoiding right now? What is the one conversation that you throw down a challenge that this is a conversation you all need to have right now?
Politics. No, really, one of the things, without getting into politics, is we are living in a world in which people are getting more and more divided by their own beliefs, their own belief system. People are paying more and more. That's why AI is also accelerating this. People are paying more attention to those who think like me, who have the same religious beliefs, the same principles, the same relationship with money, with power, with decision making, with sports, whatever it takes, right? And the more check you match, the better. So this is creating a huge issue in the workplace because, to your point, we need to tap into the collective wisdom. But if I only listen to one third or one fourth of that wisdom, which are the team members that think like me, that are like me, then we're losing all that richness, right? And this is what happened in the workplace. We need to embrace that, okay, we live in a divided world. How can we make sure that's not permeating in the workplace? Because in the end, we are who we are. The same people that live lives are the same people that work in a job. We cannot separate our life, full life, from our job. And leaders need to have that conversation about how political, sports, religion, and whatever division is getting in the way of people collaborating and being open to different ideas.
It is absolutely critical. And that's why I think your book is relevant and important as well. I'm involved in a lot of community based organizations, Gustavo, and it is incredible how it becomes pretty obvious when you know individuals where the individuals therefore self censor within the group. And that happens in organizations as well. We first need to be willing to acknowledge that. You mentioned that earlier. First, notice that there is a conversational debt, go through the questions, recognize it before then you can address it. So, for the audience, Gustavo, to read your book, Forward Talk, where would you send them to?
Yeah, you can go to my website, gustavorazzetti.com, where you're going to find articles. There's this free quiz if you want to assess your team in terms of conversational depth.
I am so grateful to you, Gustavo, and for this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me, Gustavo Razzetti.
Thank you, my friend, and looking forward to the next book that we're going to co author.